I'd like to welcome everyone to today's panel on the impact of COVID-19 on innovation centers. We'll be joined by three presenters today. Our first presenter is Dr. Krishna Udayakumar. In addition to being the Associate Director of Innovation at the Duke Global Health Institute, he's also the Associate Professor of Global Health and Medicine at Duke University and the Director of Global Health Innovation Center. Our second presenter is Dr. Shikdam Bina. She's the Director of Innovation Strategy and Program Development at CU Innovations at Colorado University. And our third presenter is Professor Giovanni Seri, and he's the Professor of Radiology at Faculty of Medicine at University of Sao Paulo. Today's session will be 60 minutes in length, which will include remarks and Q&A. Please feel free to submit questions using the chat feature on your screen, and we will get to as many questions as possible. Otherwise, thanks again for joining us today, and I'd like to welcome our first presenter, Dr. Krishna Udayakumar.
Great, thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today. Hopefully you're able to see the screen here. I'm gonna just share some slides as I go, and really wanted to share some summary thoughts about our own experience and more broadly what we're seeing around the world in terms of fostering innovation within and across academic health centers during this pandemic. And I wanted to start with a few framing comments so that we can dig into the content a bit more. And the first is really a recognition that innovation as a field is relatively decentralized. And secondly, academic health centers as an organizing entity also tend to be decentralized. So when we talk about innovation happening within academic health centers, it's inherently a decentralized set of activities. And I'm showing you here just some of the ways in which we support innovation across Duke Health and Duke University. I'll tell you a bit more about our own efforts at the Duke Global Health Innovation Center, as well as innovations in healthcare. But as you can see, we have everything from a university-wide innovation and entrepreneurship initiative, an Institute for Health Innovation, and Health Innovation Lab, and many other components of our innovation landscape. So there's not a single way in which we're responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, but rather in a collective effort across many parts of our organization. The second framing component I'd like to introduce is a recognition that innovation has a very broad spectrum. So when many of us from an academic perspective talk about innovation, we tend to focus on what here is shown as relatively upstream components, ideation, research and development into proof of concept. What many of us in the field tend to focus on when we think about innovation, especially in a global health context, is much more the downstream transition to scaling and sustainable scaling components here. And this is a framework taken from the International Development Innovation Alliance, IDIA, but is similar to many existing innovation frameworks. So to be sure that we're really more precise in what we talk about when we describe innovation, I think is very important. Third, also a recognition that ambitions really vary across organization. This is a graphic taken from an HBR article that describes more from a corporate lens the ways in which organizations can think about their own innovation ambition. Turns out that much of what organizations do is really in the core aspects of innovation, a little bit into adjacent and relatively small amount of their innovation portfolio in the much more transformational space. And yet, if you look historically, much of the return on investment tends to come from that transformational aspect and really game changers over time. So understanding ambitions and portfolio approaches, I would say, is quite important in the way that we think about innovation. And given this audience, and I think especially the work we're doing in innovation for this pandemic, I think it's also really important upfront to recognize that we have a lot to learn from the rest of the world. If you look at the graphic on the left here, this just shows you life expectancy mapped against health expenditures over the last 20 to 30 years. And you can see that the US is a huge outlier. It's not a surprise, but I think is a recognition that's necessary to have this conversation. And even in terms of the global response to COVID-19, you'll see on the graph on the right that unfortunately, we've done quite poorly in terms of containment and suppression of infections. So having a global lens, I would say, is quite important in innovating for COVID. So to that end, I think a lot of the ways that we start to think about innovation is really to ask the question, to what end, or so what? So to me, I like to think of in frameworks. And so here's a 2x2 on the x-axis on the bottom. You can see one way to think about this is what's the source of innovation? You can source things from the inside of the organization or from the outside. And then on the y-axis, the other one is where do you apply the innovation? And again, this can be on the inside of the organization or on the outside. And as we think about what might fall into these different quadrants, sourcing inside and applying inside generally tends to be the work of internal research and development types of programs. So meeting our local needs with local solutions. A lot of work that happens in academic centers is really inside out. So how do we think about developing ideas and moving them forward into commercial pathways or transferring technology out? Less common, I'd say, is more of the outside in, which tends to be about informing as well as supporting organizational strategy. It's about learning from what others are doing and creating open innovation pathways. And then when we think about sourcing innovation outside and applying it outside, the work of academic health centers generally tends to be the work of evaluation to understand what's working, to try to scale up external health impact, and in some cases, the work of venture, where we're really trying to source as well to scale ideas taken from outside the organization. In this context, I want to spend just a couple of minutes telling you about the work that I have the privilege of leading, which is really two organizations. Within Duke University, we lead the Duke Global Health Innovation Center, which is an academic organization that has the mission to support scaling of delivery and policy innovations through applied research and education to improve health worldwide. And we also host a partner organization called Innovations in Healthcare, which is a nonprofit that now 9 years ago was co-founded by Duke, McKinsey & Company, as well as the World Economic Forum, which has much more of an applied focus on increasing access to quality, affordable healthcare worldwide by scaling leading innovations. And as you can see in the graphic on the right, part of our work has been to source and curate what now is a network of 99 social enterprises that are operating in more than 90 countries around the world, from which to learn, but also those that we provide direct and indirect support to in their own scaling journeys. All of this is intended to support a vision where we see a world where innovation improves health for all. And our really driving factor, our purpose, is the idea that everyone deserves to thrive. So embedded in this concept of equity in all the work that we do. So how have we responded to what's happened in this pandemic? First, we've identified innovators around the world that are responding in their own ways, locally as well as across borders, and tried to support them as best we can. This includes organizations that have in the past responded to epidemics and pandemics, including SARS, including Ebola and MERS. And so in many ways, different parts of the world are much more prepared than we have been in the US in doing this work of preparation as well as rapid response in everything from contact tracing to development of other community-based strategies. The second thing that we did was to launch a COVID Innovation Learning and Action Network that brings together our broader global innovation community, including these 99 innovators, but we now have a community of over 400 participants that includes these innovators, corporate and foundation members, partners, and others that want to be at the table to be able to be part of peer learning as well as collaboration development. And the way we manage this Learning and Action Network is through a digital platform as well as bi-weekly virtual meetings that are thematic in their approach. The third area where we've really taken a deep dive is into the evidence. So for the last year and a half, we've led a program supported by the Gates Foundation called the Launch and Scale Speedometer, where we have started to look across the global health landscape at really better understanding what works and what doesn't work in terms of introducing and scaling up life-saving technologies and services. And here we're starting to take a deep dive into generating and sharing evidence about the development and scale up of everything from diagnostics to therapeutics to eventually vaccines. And I've also used this to develop a stakeholder engagement and advocacy platform so that we can drive decision making more quickly in response to the pandemic, but also in response to needs across the global health space. And so coming back to map what we're doing, much of our work is really in this top right quadrant. So learning from others, trying to embed some of that in our own work, but also ensuring that we're developing a global community of stakeholders so that the application of these innovations is not limited just to our own organization. And I do want to recognize, as I said, innovation is a very decentralized type of activity. And just to map a little bit of what's going on across the rest of our organization, we certainly at the bottom left quadrant, the sourcing inside for inside application, have developed an engineering response team that's developing everything from 3D printing of PPE to everything else that might be required for our own needs. On the top left here of the inside out, we've had a student team really in the lead in developing a contact tracing app that's starting to gain some traction. We've started to do a lot of work that initially was tailored to our local needs, but now is moving to external application like a scaled up symptom tracking and surveillance platform called the Global Pandemic Network. We were in the early days leveraging access to vaporized hydrogen peroxide to be able to reuse PPE, and have shared masks, I should say, and have shared that more broadly. From the outside in, I'd say much of the work we're doing in the education space and innovating around education as part of our academic health center has been to learn from outside and bring in some of the best practices. Certainly serving as a site for clinical trials has been in that capacity. We also are managing large programs like the HERO Registry of Healthcare Workers around the world, as well as COVID-19, which is a program looking at evidence generation for wearables and other devices in their use to diagnose and manage COVID. And I'd say, part of where we've really led the way has also been in the middle here, led by the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy, is being able to leverage both inside and outside expertise to generate policy analysis and recommendations that have allowed us internally, but also many organizations externally at the state and national level, as well as starting to look at global perspectives of what's working and what's not. So with that, I'll really hopefully frame this conversation just by sharing 7 lessons learned from our own work around how to innovate, especially at a time of pandemic. And say the first one there is that everybody wants to help, everybody wants to be part of the solution, and a lot of what's needed is the ability to harness and channel that passion and enthusiasm in productive and informed ways for innovation. So everybody's trying to help, and yet we have to be really careful about diluting our ability to channel scarce resources into the areas that might be most effective. The second, I think academic health centers especially have a responsibility to lead the way in innovating responsibly. We've seen irresponsible innovation across the board around the world in everything from evidence generation as well as use or advocacy of therapeutics without the evidence base behind them. So I think we should instill in ourselves that common responsibility to make sure that there's moral, ethical obligation to innovate responsibly. The third, as I mentioned, innovation is really about portfolio management, to be really clear about what our goals and portfolio management approaches are in seeking innovation. Fourth, to me, innovation is all about better communication, better collaboration, and better coordination. And I think we rarely make progress in innovation when we try to centralize or over-centralize those approaches. Fifth, I would argue that you've got to look beyond traditional borders, and whether those are borders in your own organization or literal borders to look globally to be more effective. And directly related to that, I think the best approaches to innovation are really built on partnerships, and again, being able to bring multidisciplinary perspectives as an academic health center, I think is a distinct advantage and that we can all play. And finally, I think at the end of the day, this is all about human capital. So our ability to develop and foster career development opportunities for our faculty, our staff, our trainees, and our student is at the center of what we can do to scale up and accelerate innovation, especially at a time of crisis. So thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts up front. I'll stop now and look forward to the coming discussion.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. Next, we will have a video of the next two presentations from Dr. Binam and Professor Seri.
Hello, my name is Chidam Binam, and I'm so happy to be presenting today a talk about supporting innovation in academic medical centers and the case of CU Anschutz Medical Campus and the Spark Biotech Accelerator Program. I work at CU Innovations, and I will briefly introduce the campus overall and what CU Innovations, the office that I work at, does. Then I'll delve into the case of Spark and briefly touch upon lessons learned after running this program for 3 years. CU Anschutz campus is a premier academic medical center that hosts 3 hospitals on site. And we have, as well as obviously the university, it has almost 2,000 hospital beds, 1.9 million patients visiting. And overall, we have around 6,000 faculty providers and scientists. I think we have like 1,000 active labs. It has overall, it receives constantly almost $500 million for research grants. And the 2 hospitals that we closely work with are UC Health and Children's Hospital Colorado. And Children's is constantly ranked among the top universities, top hospitals in the nation. And UC Health is also a very broad network across Colorado. The campus had actually some great success in the past in commercializing some of its discoveries, like Zostavax, the Shingrix vaccine was discovered on the campus. Like we had various other discoveries that reached the patients, and some of the famous companies that was like Myogen acquired for $2.5 billion by Gilead. So overall, the campus had history of innovation, and we have been trying to accelerate that. CU Innovations is the office in charge of both technology transfer and also speeding up ethics innovation. And we have ranked in one of the most recent surveys among the top 20 tech transfer offices in the world. And we receive constantly over 200 invention disclosures per year. And 82% of issued patents are licensed to industry. The second pillar, the venture part, we'll talk a bit more about that through Spark and Reach. And digital health, there is a very strong presence of digital health technologies and strong collaboration with industry. That also covers our hospital partners. Also, we pay a lot of attention, and we understand the importance of personalized medicine, data in the new age. And we have a biobank of 450,000 annotated samples, the data warehouse with 10 million longitudinal clinical records, combined with claims, multi-omics, and biometric data for drugs that we are in algorithm development. Also for clinical trials, there is a streamlining infrastructure that has been one of the original efforts of CU Innovations, really streamlining and speeding up the clinical trial process. So we can open clinical trials in 7 days and have IRB reviews in less than 5 days. So the main topic of today's discussion is actually Spark. The Spark program has been brought to the campus almost by now 3 years ago by a group of faculty leaders supported by the chancellor. And its mission is to accelerate, and bridge the translational gap, advancing biomedical discoveries into new treatments. So obviously with $500 million research funding, there's a lot of discoveries, but taking those discoveries to the patient, to the market, requires different skill set. That's not always part of either the medical training curriculum or like a scientist, a PhD curriculum. So that needed to be supported through different ways and means, and Spark is trying to achieve that. We are trying to bridge the translational gap, or what is infamously called the value of debt. So, bridging basically the middle part from discovery to the clinical trials. We accept both drug projects, device projects, and diagnostic projects to the program. Every year, we open a call for applications across the campus. That is open to all our faculty and postdocs, as long as they have a faculty mentor. And we select 10 projects. Well, it's not us, actually. There's an external review committee that selects projects. And that external committee is comprised of people that have successfully done this in industry setting, or that have successfully commercialized their products in a startup. And that group actually constitutes the second pillar, the mentorship. So the program overall is built on 3 pillars. First is funding, obviously a major challenge for any translational work is lack of funding generally. And we provide up to 100,000 per project for 2 years and choose, I've already mentioned, like up to 10 projects per year. And so for the initial year, I remember there were like hesitation among some faculty if we would actually receive any projects. So we received more than 50, well, closer to 60 applications for our first year. So there is a good desire and demand among faculty to really see their work reach the patients, but they didn't have the tools to enable that. So the second part is mentorship, and mentorship we realize has been a critical component that that really brings success to these teams. Again, taking a discovery to the market requires different skill set, and these mentors have done this before and are willing to give back to academia and engage, with bright academics, with bright students, both to stay up to date with discoveries, but also like genuinely share their experiences. And the third pillar is education. We have some sort of a curriculum-based education, and we meet every other Wednesday night and bring in a speaker, around topics of regulatory issues, reimbursement, or intellectual property, or SBIR, CTR funding. So these ranges, and that's also like, this regular meetings also help to build a community of mentors. So it contributes to the social part, apart from the education. So Spark, we brought Spark in from actually Stanford. We've been working in close collaboration with Stanford, which has a global dimension, global program, and we're part of that global network. Most recently, Spark program have actually received NIH funding and become part of the REACH program that was set up by NIH. So in 2013, NIH gave funding to East Coast, West Coast, and Cleveland Clinic to build up this accelerated innovation centers. Then in 2015, they set up 3 REACH hubs. And most recently in 2019, they offered funding to 5 new hubs, and Spark Colorado and Nashville Medical Campus has become one of those 5 designated hubs. This has apart from obviously like the financial side, it has a symbolic value in our view, because receiving funding from NIH for commercialization has obviously a symbolic value for researchers that are used to, running their basic research with NIH funding, and now discovering, well, actually NIH is actually very much interested in seeing some of those, at least basic research, to be translated to patients and have a direct impact. Also, another benefit, obviously, we're part of a broader network that shares best practices across. And finally, NIH has set up a great review committee comprised of representatives from FDA, USPTO, CMS, basically all the key components that you could think of in product development expertise. So we submit our projects and they provide feedback to us. So Spark is run by a group of successful executives and faculty that have successfully commercialized their discoveries. Like Rick Duke is the PI on the grant, and Steve Van Nerden is Associate Vice Chancellor of Biotechnology for the university. That also, this team is a great, I think, institutional structure to run such a program, because you have both faculty and administration side by side represented in the committee, which provides great exchange and constant feedback to both sides. And having these, successful academic entrepreneurs up in front is also very much encouraging to the newcomers or willing, investigators. What we've discovered throughout this process after running those Spark seminars, like the ones that I attended the most, are actually when we have faculty entrepreneurs and success stories. I think faculty would like to hear the stories of success stories of other faculty and learn from them. So having representation in our kind of executive group has been invaluable. And finally, we have a very successful entrepreneur in our group, Stan Lapidus, who has successfully commercialized and actually revolutionized diagnostic industry with at least 2 of his products, the ThinPub smear test and most recently Cologuard. Mentorship from the Spark advisors, as I already mentioned, ranges across like business strategy, pharmaceutical development, device development. We had the luck actually to engage medicinal chemists for drug development that worked in big pharma over decades, and their perspective is very much enlightening to our faculty. We have IP attorneys both in-house, but also like as Spark mentors from local law firms. We have regulatory experts, and that's we keep reminding our teams and our faculty that drug development or device development, that's a teamwork. So you can't have one person that knows everything. You really need to build a strong team to have a successful product to market. So the program, ranges across a continuum, and like obviously we start supporting and funding innovators. We provide entrepreneurial education as well as product development, commercialization support. But then we also, especially through REACH, we've been thinking about like preparing these programs for exit and what is next for them to leverage whatever they've been doing within the program last 2 years. So one area that we're focusing is SDR, SDR funding as a great way of non-dilutive funding. We also as a program, as an office, our main effort has been really providing all the commercialization resources and making them readily accessible, that faculty doesn't need to really spend trying to figure out like which regulatory consultant do I need to work, or who is the best lawyer that I need to talk for corporate formation. So we've done this work and do it on their behalf and provide them options so that they can quickly review and choose and move forward with. And a lot of times we also provide funding to support this sort of engagement, both at the program level, but also the office has some separate part of funds that have been supporting these commercialization, access to these commercialization resources. And Spark seminars, as I mentioned, like we run it every 2 weeks, we've been reviewing actually the best pedagogical methods for learning, because learning regulatory affairs within a 2-hour seminar is an impossible mission. So we are planning to have actually a boot camp upfront before actually applications, or in conjunction with applications, and bring kind of the core of learning upfront, where people are much motivated in applying the program, and they can apply that learning to their application form, and we will be providing consulting, one-on-one to the teams. So we've been really rethinking how to provide this education in to a busy adults group. Finally, like lessons learned after running this program for almost 3 years, and we get to discover culture change, a slow process that takes time and effort, but sense of ownership of top leadership is critical. So, supporting innovation shouldn't be just delegated to an office. Like, innovation needs to be highlighted in every speech, in every conversation, that is coming through the top leadership. And that is a way to sustain culture change and make a broader impact. And we also discovered, obviously, it's a different process in really taking that discovery to the patient. And what is key is the product development expertise. If you really don't understand regulatory affairs, you might be conducting all your experiments, which actually might be meaningless, because you can't take any of that data to FDA for approval. So you have to go back and start again. So to save time and effort, bringing that product development expertise up front and engaging them with teams is really fundamental. Well, thank you so much for listening to me, and I look forward to the questions.
Back in early 2020, we had no idea of the extent of transformations the world would face during this pandemic. Our lives have drastically changed in the blink of an eye. Personal contact between family, friends, and co-workers became a health and life threat. In a race against time, we had to introduce new behaviors to our daily activities. More urgently, hospitals had to restructure themselves to save lives while battling with high-volume emergency needs, reduced elective care, increased prices, and shortages of equipment. Together, academic and research centers are being pressured to find answers by the minute, with far from enough resources to accelerate these findings. Society and markets have new emerging needs, and the demand for novel technological solutions, which make it possible for people to safely navigate this scenario with increasing exponentiality. And the hardest part is the underlying context of utmost political and economic uncertainty. These same research institutions are seeking to react to the new social, governmental, and economic norms. Now is the perfect opportunity to reinforce the role of science and its absolute value. But scientific bodies need to reshape themselves to prove their worth within this challenging scenario. The first change was the reorientation and integration of ongoing research to support the fight against coronavirus. Real and urgent needs have become the drivers of research, and these in turn require new skills to be integrated into previously established research methods. For this, a new system is being developed, focusing on creation, design, and scalability of these products and services. This dedicated effort is allowing unparalleled innovation to gain full speed. At the same time, these institutions should position themselves as catalysts for innovation, as their own genesis and mission suggests. The real challenge then is to structure a balanced environment between all ecosystem actors, stimulate partnership between the public and the private sectors, enhance the use of various resources available, generate applicable results. This step forward also involves a closer collaboration between research groups at different universities and fields of expertise. Medicine, engineering, technology, and entrepreneurship integrated into transdisciplinary R&D groups, which enable the rapid development of extraordinary projects. We have seen the implementation of futuristic AI technologies. It gives medical access to image pattern recognition algorithms, facilitating the diagnosis of COVID-19. Innovations such as these are essential for improving the quality of healthcare and managing pandemics, especially in a public hospital with an efficient and heterogeneous infrastructure. Another positive example of the association between engineering and medicine is a new model of patient monitoring with an integrated platform and remotely operated electromedical equipment. With this unprecedented scenario of technological innovation, we have launched ViralCure, an alternative funding marketplace platform aimed at decentralizing science funding and transforming its drivers for human impact. Down the road, it will also decentralize patenting so that the medical research and scientific knowledge does not remain in the hands of the privileged minority. This pandemic demanded a large amount of new technologies, and it is also the role of research institutions to evaluate their feasibility. It is important to have a solid scientific bias in order to integrate these solutions into a care routine in a safe and effective manner. At this present moment, the Hospital das Clínicas DSP has positioned itself and developed a structure for evaluating these new tools, allowing for a rapid integration into the healthcare system. The current scenario has brought a great sense of collectiveness and creativity that has transformed exhausted research structures in a very positive way. The challenge now is, how can we maintain this active, innovative, and efficient structure into a post-pandemic world? One thing is certain. Our current experiment has shown us this ongoing construction will not be done by one organization alone.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Bainal and Professor Seri, for that presentations. We will now begin the Q&A session. Please remember to submit your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So let's see. People might be typing. Hold with me.
Katie, I've enabled the hand feature. So for the attendees, if you'd like to raise your hand, we can also allow you to talk and ask any questions that you may have.
Everything was explained so beautifully. You don't have to explain anything. Let's see, we'll give people a couple more minutes. Maybe some people are still typing up their questions.
While we wait, I actually have a question for our panelists today. As I've been facilitating a lot of these webinars for our regional offices with the association, innovation has come up a lot. and the importance of it, as well as collaboration. But the financial aspect seems to be really crucial. Getting the investment, the financial support from the institution. And I think this is something a lot of institutions can relate to. So it would be great to hear from our panelists today about how you've dealt with that, how you've overcome that. Yeah.
I'm happy to jump in and start to take that on. I agree. I think investment is very important to innovation. I'd say in several ways. One of the points I tried to make is really this idea of a portfolio approach to innovation is very similar to an investment approach. So thinking about an investment across different aspects of innovation, I think is really important to understand where you want to be weighted. Is it on the research and development side and translation? Is it much more about trying to take products to market? Is it more around developing internal capabilities and the like? So ensuring that there's an appropriate investment relative to the ambitions or aspirations, I think is quite important. Secondly, on the flip side of that, I think some of the best and most transformational innovation is actually emerging under resource constrained settings. And a good bit of our work in looking globally has been really to focus on low and middle income countries, to focus on resource constrained settings, because that's forcing much more creative and transformational innovation to take place. So we have started to look at and write about this idea of frugal innovation. So how can you really set a constraint from a financial perspective that allows innovation to take hold and solve challenges in a more creative way? So I do think that the idea of frugal innovation is also one that more academic health centers could take on.
We do have some other questions from the audience, unless anybody else wants to jump in to answer, add on to that. No, okay. Please.
Yes, well, maybe I could talk a little bit about the moment that we are living, the COVID era. And one of the ideas that we've had trying to bring more resources to innovation is we developed a startup for crowdfunding. And these fundings are devoted to research and assistance in patients with COVID. I think it was a very good experience because we were able to obtain resources to develop a few projects that we consider that are quite important for our country, like a AI platform and algorithm that is helping all our radiologists around Brazil to diagnose the chest case, the lung cases of coronavirus, and also the extension of the disease. So they send the cases. We have now 44 hospitals connected to our platform, and they send the chest CT, and we send a report of the case and the degree of possibility of being a case of coronavirus, and also the extension of the disease. So it's we are helping, considering that we are a research center, the largest university in Brazil. We are helping radiologists all around the country to make a precise diagnosis of coronavirus. And also we developed a platform for monitoring patients in intensive care. And we developed a robot for helping cleaning intensive care units, avoiding contamination. So there are a few projects that we were able to develop with a special program of crowdfunding for the moment that we are living all around the world.
Great, thank you. One of the questions from the audience is, I would like to know how the panel see augmented reality and virtual reality affecting healthcare.
maybe I could comment on the previous question, but also like add up to this one. Obviously, financial resources is fundamental in innovation, and that also comes partly with what I quoted, like, you know, the sense of ownership of the leadership and, you know, providing enough resources. But it works two ways. Like when you really establish an infrastructure, then actually that pays back for the institution as well, because innovation is also bringing a lot of resources to medical centers and universities. And then in terms of investment, it's, you know, financial investment is obviously one part of it, but then it's, you know, as equally important is, you know, investing in time, in building partnerships, in, you know, communicating right with your faculty, with your partners, ecosystem partners, and, you know, contributing to the culture change. So I think we should see the investment not just purely by dollars, but overall, you know, as human elements and interactions and partnerships. Augmented reality and virtual reality are not necessarily my area of expertise, but obviously there's a lot of developments in that field. So probably partly how healthcare will be impacted from this field will depend on the cost of the technology and how accessible it is. Like, I personally was naively thinking that actually during this COVID-19 crisis, augmented reality and virtual reality could play actually an important role for especially like probably this, the psychological wave that we'll have to cope with as a result of a pandemic. You know, but it seems like the industry is having kind of mixed input about that, because partly of the high cost of technology, and, you know, that it becomes partly inaccessible to a broader consumer.
Great. Another question is how to overcome the shortage of human capital in underdeveloped countries without feeding any brain drain?
Sure, I'll start with that. I think this is a really important topic to address, and I'd say the anchor of this is really around building sustainable partnerships, and I think especially focusing on the idea of strengthening capacity, but very much so about reciprocal learning, and ensuring that what we're doing around the world is actually focusing on improving human capital, on addressing the human capital needs in ways that actually leave everyone with stronger capacity and competencies at the end of the day. And that's certainly the way that we've built a global network, both of innovators, but also of collaborating academic and research institutions around the world.
Yeah, so I agree. I think it's very important, this international collaboration. We need to help institutions that are starting with innovation, and we need to develop a network of collaboration. One good example is the problem of the development of vaccines, that we need different countries collaborating in this effort of developing a vaccine right now. So it's not only in one country that could obtain good results in research concerning new tools or new drugs for the treatment of coronavirus or other disease at the moment.
I agree with both speakers. You know, I think what a global pandemic is showing us, we're not, you know, living in little islands that we could isolate ourselves. So we have to have this global perspective, and sustainable partnerships, I totally agree with the first speaker, is one method. And then there's various probably channels and modalities that could be adopted for that. You know, exchange programs, guest visitorships. And I personally participated in all of those, like when I was doing my PhD and master's. So these are all great mechanisms, I think, to employ to take back some of the know-how to developing countries.
Great, thank you. We have one more question as of now. How can other areas contribute to the project, like surgery, for example, using physical barriers? I'm sorry, I think that's physical barriers.
If we're talking broadly about innovation, I think surgery has a lot of potential. And we're trying to tap into that potential currently on CEO Anxious, like building closer collaboration with our engineering school, bringing engineers and design teams with the surgery clinicians. And the challenge overall, say for instance for surgery, is that you have such brilliant minds constantly seeing what they do from different lenses and complaining how actually the tools or equipment might be inefficient, inadequate, but then they don't always have the time or the bandwidth to really to come up with a solution. So you have to build that interdisciplinary team, and you have to have that infrastructure, institutional infrastructure, to really bring those design teams like engineers to co-design, co-think collectively, and then providing all this commercialization and product development resources. I think those are fundamental for success.
We have surgeons working together with engineers in our Department of Surgery, and particularly in working with robotics and developing new tools for more precise surgery, and also using AI for helping to define the best procedure in each patient.
Yeah, I fully agree with all of those perspectives. I think surgical innovation holds great promise, and one where I think academic health centers are especially well positioned given the multidisciplinary nature and the ability to bring engineers to the field, to bring students and learners into that environment, and really to also be able to provide that infrastructure to enable innovation to actually take hold and to progress. So I think that's certainly a promising arena.
Great. We do have another question. What are the biggest problems technological innovations can solve at this moment? Is there a problem that the panel sees relevant, but it's not being broadly communicated?
I'll provide perhaps the skeptic's perspective on this, in that even though I work very deeply in the innovation space, I come at this as a skeptic of technology in general. So for the hundreds of pitches I hear about the greatest new technology, my first question is always, so what? I think too often we get tied into the technical specifications of what a technology can do, and forget that what we're trying to do at the end of the day is solve problems for people. So I'd say really focus on, for any innovation, on what problem you're trying to solve first before you figure out that you have a solution in search of a problem.
And particularly at our hospital, we are a public hospital, so we are focused in solving the problems that we have in our assistance to the patient. So we try to solve the problems that we have, and the engineers are helping us to find the best way to solve the problems in a very practical way, to improve the quality of assistance and the best income outcome for the patients.
I actually totally agree with both statements. I definitely would, put that question, so what question, and and then plus for whom question, right? Because innovation is also context bound. The innovation that is needed, say, for instance, in this country, United States, is probably different than, say, in China, Russia, or Africa. If you were to contextualize in the US, then probably technological innovation is desperately needed for improving healthcare and outcomes and improving efficiency. So, working closely with our hospital partners, we're trying to contribute to that using, newly available technologies, basically.
Great. Another question. Is simulation devices development for education under the radar of international collaboration?
Well, I would like to say that during this pandemic, we suffer of human resources in intensive care. So many patients had a bad outcome because of insufficient human resources. So education is the most important thing that we have to work in hospital, in healthcare. And the international collaborations could help a lot to obtain better results in our healthcare system. So I think we need to invest in education, and we need to improve this international collaboration. I think healthcare is a social problem, and we need to focus in collaboration.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and fully agree with that. I think if you broaden the question perhaps beyond simulation to really think about virtual engagement and everything from virtual care to virtual education, I think we've all had a crash course in this over the last 6 months or so, and I think we've probably accelerated our approaches more in these last 6 months than we have perhaps in the last 10 years. So I think this is a point where we're really understanding what's feasible to be done in a virtual environment, and hopefully much of that learning takes hold and becomes much more standardized in the future.
Great. We actually have one final question. Can you speak more about how you changed culture within the university setting?
I guess that could be contextualized at a broader level, like institutional change or culture change. And academia has its own culture, and that might be, say, different than a factory, right? Or in a manufacturing facility. So culture change, probably what the literature would also confirm, I hope, comes both top bottom, but also bottom up. So what we've been trying to achieve is that we have a very strong leadership that is really driving innovation and embraces innovation. And then we've been also trying to build bottom up programs to really, show examples of success stories, show that academia is not only about discovering things, but also taking things out to the patients, making a direct impact. And it's not a bad exercise. You can be a great academic, but you could be a great inventor. You could be a great entrepreneur. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, and you don't have to quit academia to venture to entrepreneurial kind of adventures. So we've been trying to put out those examples. And part of it is, again, in my talk I mentioned, culture change in a medical setting. For instance, we really cared about that NIH grant, the REACH grant, because NIH has been supporting a lot of this basic research. But now there is broader kind of soul searching. How do we help translate? How do we actually help, academics to approach their discoveries differently? So I think building broader collaborations and highlighting the change even in funding agencies have been instrumental in supporting the culture change.
Okay. Well, we are actually at time. So I want to say, thank you all for joining. Before you leave, if you have time to take a quick poll, we would greatly appreciate it. But I do want to thank our presenters, Dr. Hidayat Kumar, Dr. Binam, and Dr. Sari. We really do appreciate you joining us online today, and everyone who did join us. So we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye. I hope to see you soon again.
Bye-bye.